Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Discovery. Matthew Hardy had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a homicide detective in Portland had taught him to spot lies, fear, and guilt from across a room. But Dr. Guillermo Walls was harder to read than most. The dentist's hands trembled slightly as he placed the x-ray on the light board, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something Matthew couldn't quite identify. Emma's cavity is the least of our concerns, Dr. Walls said, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced toward the waiting room where 8-year-old Emma sat reading a book, her legs swinging from the chair. Mr. Hardy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Matthew's wife, Krista, shifted beside him, her nurse's instincts picking up on the tension. What's wrong? She asked. Dr. Walls pointed to a shadow in Emma's lower jaw on the x-ray. At first glance, it looked like a normal tooth formation, but as Matthew studied it closer, he noticed something unsettling. The shadow had perfectly geometric edges, almost crystalline in structure, and it seemed to extend deeper into the bone than any tooth should. This isn't natural, Dr. Walls continued. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. It appears to be integrated with her jawbone, like it's been growing with her since birth. Matthew's training kicked in. He noted the sweat beading on the dentist's forehead, the way his eyes kept darting to the door. You've seen something like this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Walls hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. There's someone who needs to know about this. He started dialing, then stopped, looking directly at Matthew. Mr. Hardy, who is Emma really? Where did she come from? The question hit like a physical blow. Matthew felt Krista's hand tighten on his arm. They'd adopted Emma when she was 6 months old through a private agency. The paperwork had been impeccable, the background checks thorough. Emma's birth mother had been a young woman who died in a car accident shortly after signing the adoption papers. We adopted her legally, Krista said defensively. Everything was documented. The adoption agency, Matthew said slowly, his detective instincts now fully engaged. What was it called again? Sunrise Family Services, Krista replied. Why? What does this have to do with? Dr. Walls finished dialing his number. As he waited for an answer, he said, because I've seen one other case like this. A child in Seattle about 5 years ago. The parents brought him in for a routine cleaning. His face darkened. That family disappeared 3 days later. The authorities found their house empty. No signs of struggle. No forwarding address. Like they'd never existed. The phone connected. Dr. Dunlap? It's Guillermo. Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, I got another one. The marker, it's here. In Portland. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. No, I'm sure. Same crystalline structure. Same integration pattern. The child is 8 years old. Matthew's blood ran cold. He stepped forward and pressed the disconnect button on Dr. Wall's phone. Who is Dr. Dunlap? And why are you calling him about my daughter? The dentist's face went pale. Mr. Hardy, you don't understand. Dr. Philip Dunlap is a researcher. He's been tracking these cases for years. He's trying to help. Help what? Matthew's voice carried the authority of 2 decades in law enforcement. Start talking. Now. Dr. Walls glanced toward the waiting room again. Not here. Not with Emma nearby. Meet me tonight at my office, 9 o'clock. Come alone. And Mr. Hardy? He grabbed Matthew's arm. Don't trust anyone else with this information. Not yet. As they left the dental office, Emma skipped between her parents, oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults. Dad, Dr. Walls seemed scared, she said with the perceptiveness that had always amazed Matthew. Did I do something wrong? Matthew knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that were the same shade of green as Krista's, though they shared no genetic connection. You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have confusing conversations. That evening, after Emma was tucked into bed, Matthew sat in his study reviewing everything he could find about Sunrise Family Services. The agency had closed down 7 years ago, citing financial difficulties. But something nagged at him about the timing. He pulled up news archives from that period and found a small article buried in the Portland Tribune, local adoption agency under investigation for irregular practices. The article was frustratingly vague, mentioning only that the state had questions about the agency's record-keeping and source documentation for several adoptions. No charges had been filed, and the investigation had apparently died when the agency voluntarily closed. Krista appeared in the doorway, still in her scrubs from the late shift at the hospital. Find anything? Questions. Lots of questions. He showed her the article. Did you ever meet Emma's birth mother? No, remember? She died before we could meet her. The social worker, Mrs. What was her name? Pat something. Pat Charles, Matthew said, pulling up the adoption file from their safe. Let's see what we can find about her. 30 minutes of searching revealed that Pat Charles had worked for Sunrise Family Services for exactly 8 months, just long enough to handle Emma's adoption. Before that, no employment history. After the agency closed, she'd vanished from public records entirely. Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't go to the dentist tonight. They're watching. Meet me at Pioneer Courthouse Square, Fountainside, 10 p.m. Come alone. Gee. He showed the text to Krista. This is getting complicated fast. Should we call the police? Matthew considered it. His former colleagues would help, but this felt bigger than a local investigation. Someone had placed something in their daughter's jaw, and people were willing to threaten families to keep it secret. Not yet. Let me talk to Dr. Walls first. If this is what I think it is, we're going to need to be very careful about who we trust. As he prepared to leave for the meeting, Matthew checked his service weapon and spare magazine. Whatever was happening, someone had turned their 8-year-old daughter into the center of it. And Matthew Hardy had never backed down from a fight in his life. Chapter 2. The Meeting. Pioneer Courthouse Square bustled with late evening activity despite the October chill. Matthew positioned himself near the fountain, scanning faces with practiced efficiency. At 10:03, Dr. Walls appeared from the direction of the MAC station, looking over his shoulder every few steps. Thank you for coming, Dr. Walls said, settling beside Matthew on the fountain's edge. I wasn't sure you would. Start talking. What's in my daughter's jaw? Dr. Walls pulled out a tablet, showing Matthew a magnified version of Emma's X-ray alongside another image. This is the Seattle case I mentioned. Same structure, same placement. We call them biomarkers. There's a group of us. Doctors, researchers, a few parents who figured out. Dr. Walls swiped to another image. These markers aren't natural, Mr. Hardy. They're manufactured, planted in children during infancy. Matthew studied the images. The crystalline structures were identical, perfectly symmetrical in a way that nature never produced. Planted by who? That's where it gets complicated. Dr. Walls glanced around nervously. The markers contain encoded genetic information, DNA samples, blood type, tissue compatibility data. Essentially, they turn children into living medical databases. For what purpose? Organ harvesting, experimental surgeries. The markers identify children with rare genetic traits or perfect tissue matches for wealthy clients. Dr. Wall's voice dropped further. Dr. Philip Dunlap runs the operation. He's been doing this for 15 years, maybe longer. Matthew felt rage building in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. And you help him? No, Dr. Walls said quickly. I discovered the first case by accident. When that Seattle family disappeared, I started investigating. I've been documenting cases, trying to build evidence. But Dunlap has connections everywhere. Government contracts, hospital boards, university research departments. How many children? We've identified 47 markers across 6 states. Emma makes 48. Dr. Walls showed Matthew a map on his tablet, dots scattered across the Pacific Northwest. Most parents never know. Regular dentists miss the markers because they blend with natural bone structure. I only noticed because I specialize in pediatric orthodontics. Matthew processed this information, his detective mind automatically organizing facts and implications. The phone call today. You warned Dunlap about Emma. Dr. Walls nodded miserably. Standard protocol. I report new discoveries, and he dispatches a team to evaluate the child. Usually, They approach the family with offers for free medical research participation. If the family refuses, he gestured helplessly. They disappear. Or worse, the Martinez family in Sacramento refused. Their son died in a car accident 2 weeks later. The markers were surgically removed post-mortem. Matthew's hands clenched into fists. Someone had been planning to use his daughter as spare parts. How long do we have? Dunlap's team usually arrives within 48 hours of initial contact. But there's something else. Dr. Walls hesitated. Your adoption agency, Sunrise Family Services. It was a front operation. Dunlap funded it specifically to place marker children with families who wouldn't ask difficult questions. Meaning, law enforcement families, military, medical professionals. People who trust institutions and follow proper channels. People who would be unlikely to investigate irregularities in their child's medical history. The pieces clicked into place. Their adoption had been too smooth, too perfect. No waiting lists, no complications, minimal paperwork. They'd been selected as much as they'd selected Emma. I need the location of Dunlap's operation, Matthew said. Mr. Hardy, you can't just. The location. Dr. Walls pulled up another file on his tablet. He has a private medical facility outside Seattle. Officially, it's a pediatric research center focusing on genetic disorders. Unofficially, he showed Matthew satellite images of a compound surrounded by high fences and security cameras. It's where they take the children. Matthew memorized the address and surrounding geography. Who else knows about this? A small group. Dr. Rosario Chan in San Francisco. She's been tracking the West Coast cases. Earl Rich, a private investigator in Denver whose grandson had a marker. And Veronica Harmon. She's a federal prosecutor, but she's also a parent. Her daughter was taken 3 years ago. Taken. Emma's not the first child Dunlap has tried to reclaim. Sometimes he approaches families directly, offers large sums of money for extended medical studies. When that fails, children have accidents, or families receive offers they can't refuse. Matthew stood up, decision made. I need contact information for your group, and I need everything you have on Dunlap's operation. What are you planning? I'm going to get my daughter back. Mr. Hardy, she's not gone yet. Maybe if you cooperate with Dunlap. Matthew turned, and Dr. Wall saw something in his eyes that made him step backward. Doctor, someone surgically altered my daughter without consent and has been planning to harvest her organs since infancy. Cooperation isn't on the table. As Matthew walked away, Dr. Walls called after him. Be careful. Dunlap has resources you can't imagine. Money, connections, people in government positions. He's untouchable through normal channels. Matthew paused. Normal channels aren't what I had in mind. Back home, he found Krista in Emma's room, watching their daughter sleep. How bad is it? She whispered. Bad. He told her everything, watching his wife's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally, cold determination. This was why he'd fallen in love with Krista Hardy 15 years ago. She was a fighter. What do we do? Matthew looked at Emma, peaceful in sleep, unaware that someone viewed her as inventory rather than a child. We disappear for a few days while I handle this. Can you get time off from the hospital? I'll call in sick. Krista's voice carried the same steely resolve that had gotten her through nursing school while working 2 jobs. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. I have an old army buddy with a cabin in the Cascades. Off the grid, defensible position. Matthew was already planning logistics. Pack light. We leave first thing in the morning. And then, Matthew checked his weapon again, ensuring a round was chambered. Then I paid Dr. Philip Dunlap a visit he'll never forget. As they prepared for what might be a long absence, Matthew called in a favor from his former partner, Detective Bruce Weber. Bruce, I need a background check on a Dr. Philip Dunlap in Seattle. Medical researcher, probably his government contracts. Matt, you've been retired for 2 years. What's this about? Someone's threatening my family. I need to know what I'm up against. Bruce's tone shifted. How deep do you want me to dig? Deep enough to bury him. Chapter 3. First Contact. The cabin belonged to Harvey Aguilar, Matthew's former squad leader from their Army days. Nestled in a valley 40 miles east of Portland, It was accessible only by a winding dirt road that Harvey had rigged with motion sensors. If anyone approached uninvited, they'd know about it long before visitors reached the cabin. Matthew had spent the morning teaching Emma to fish in the nearby stream, while Krista organized their temporary living space. To an 8-year-old, this felt like an adventure. To her parents, it felt like hiding from a nightmare. Bruce Weber's call came through at 2 p.m. "Matt, what the hell have you stumbled into?" Bruce's voice carried an edge Matthew had heard only during their worst cases. "Philip Dunlap doesn't exist." "What do you mean?" "I mean the identity is fabricated. Well-crafted, backed by decades of false documentation, but fabricated. The real Philip Dunlap died in a car accident in 1987. Someone's been using his social security number and medical credentials for 20 years. Matthew felt ice in his veins. Any idea who's really behind it? That's where it gets interesting. The medical facility outside Seattle, it's owned by a shell company called Genesis Medical Research. That company is owned by another shell company, which is owned by another. But I followed the money, and it all traces back to a private equity fund managed by one Curtis Palmer. The name meant nothing to Matthew, but Bruce continued. Palmer's got his fingers in a dozen different medical research operations across the country. Officially, he's a legitimate businessman. Unofficially, word is he's connected to some very dark medical experiments dating back to the 90s. Government connections? Deep ones. Palmer has contracts with the Department of Defense, the CDC, and half a dozen university research programs. If you're planning to take him on through official channels, forget it. He's got protection at levels you can't reach. Matthew walked outside, keeping Emma in sight while he processed this information. What about the Seattle facility? That's the strangest part. According to county records, the facility was evacuated 3 days ago. Officially, they're relocating due to infrastructure concerns. But Matt, I drove by there this morning. The place is gutted. They didn't relocate, they ran. Someone tipped them off? Has to be. The question is who? Bruce paused. Matt, there's something else. I ran a check on your adoption agency, Sunrise Family Services. You're not going to like this. Matthew braced himself. Tell me. The agency handled 312 adoptions during its 8-year operation. I cross-referenced with missing children reports and found something disturbing. 46 children placed by Sunrise have been reported missing or have died under suspicious circumstances in the past decade. The number made Matthew's stomach turn. 46 families destroyed. 46 children stolen or killed. Emma's number 47. Not if I can help it, Bruce said. I'm driving up to Seattle tomorrow to check the facility. If there's evidence left behind, I'll find it. After ending the call, Matthew found Krista teaching Emma to identify edible plants near the cabin. His wife's medical background made her naturally cautious, but she was adapting to their wilderness refuge with surprising resilience. Daddy, look, Emma held up a handful of blackberries. Mom says these are safe to eat in the wild. Matthew forced a smile. That's good to know, sweetheart. What else did Mom teach you? How to tell if water is clean to drink and which berries are poisonous, and how to signal for help if we get lost. Emma's excitement was infectious. Are we going to live here forever? Just for a little while, Matthew said, meeting Krista's eyes over Emma's head. We're having an adventure. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Matthew and Krista sat by the fire planning their next move. We can't run forever, Krista said. Emma needs to go back to school, see her friends. I know. That's why I'm going to end this. Ow! Matthew had been thinking about this all day. Palmer and his operation had survived by staying in shadows, using legitimate fronts and government connections to avoid scrutiny. But shadows worked both ways. Palmer's strength is also his weakness. He operates through intermediaries and shell companies because he can't afford direct exposure. If I can force him into the open, make him act personally instead of through surrogates, he becomes vulnerable. That sounds dangerous. Less dangerous than letting him come after Emma. Matthew poked the fire, sending sparks into the night sky. I've been reading about his operations. He's methodical, patient. He doesn't like surprises or complications. I'm going to give him both. Krista studied her husband's profile in the firelight. She'd seen this expression before, during the handful of cases that had consumed him completely. Matthew Hardy could be gentle and patient, a devoted father and husband. But when someone threatened his family, he became something else entirely. What do you need me to do? Keep Emma safe. Hardy's rigged this place with enough security to hold off an army. If something goes wrong, there's a satellite phone in the kitchen. Call the FBI field office in Portland and ask for Agent Jose Scott. Bruce gave me his name. He's clean, not connected to Palmer's network. And if something goes very wrong... Matthew handed her a key. Harvey's got a weapons cache in the basement. You know how to use everything down there. They both knew that if it came to that, they'd already lost. But Matthew had learned long ago that the difference between surviving and dying often came down to preparation and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Hardy, we need to talk. Dr. Dunlap would like to discuss Emma's medical future. Cooperation benefits everyone. VH. Matthew showed the message to Krista. VH Veronica Harmon, the federal prosecutor Dr. Walls mentioned. The one whose daughter was taken. Matthew was already formulating a response. If Veronica Harmon was working with Palmer now, it meant they'd either bought her cooperation or she'd never been on their side to begin with. Either way, it was time to draw them out. He typed back, Lighthouse Park, Portland. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. The response came immediately. Agreed. Don't make this more complicated than necessary. Matthew smiled grimly. Complicated was exactly what he had in mind. Chapter 4. The Trap. Lighthouse Park offered excellent sight lines and multiple escape routes, crucial for a meeting with potentially hostile parties. Matthew arrived an hour early, positioning himself with a clear view of all approaches while remaining concealed behind a maintenance building. His years hunting violent criminals had taught him patience. Veronica Harmon arrived precisely at 2 p.m., but she wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits flanked her at a distance, trying to look like casual park visitors. Matthew noted their positions, their poor attempts at concealment, and the bulges under their jackets that suggested weapons. Harmon was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with prematurely gray hair and the pallor of someone who spent too much time indoors. She sat on the designated bench and waited, checking her phone repeatedly. Matthew approached from behind, using a jogger's path that kept him out of sight of her escorts. Ms. Harmon. She startled, then composed herself quickly. Mr. Hardy, thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries. What does Palmer want? Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly. You've been investigating. That's either very smart or very stupid. She gestured for him to sit, but Matthew remained standing. Dr. Palmer represents significant medical research interests. Emma's condition could contribute to breakthrough treatments for genetic disorders. Her condition, the biomarker in her jaw, contains genetic sequencing that's extremely valuable for certain types of research. We're prepared to offer your family substantial compensation for her participation in a study. Matthew let his jacket fall open slightly, ensuring Harmon could see his holstered weapon. How substantial? $2 million. Tax-free. In exchange for 6 months of medical observation and testing. And if we refuse? Harmon's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Mr. Hardy, 46 other families have found our offers compelling. I'd hate for Emma to face the same difficulties as children whose parents were less cooperative. There was the threat, delivered with bureaucratic politeness. Matthew smiled, and Harmon seemed to sense she'd made a mistake. Here's my counteroffer, Matthew said. You and Palmer leave my family alone. Permanently. In exchange, I don't spend the rest of my life hunting you down. I don't think you understand the scope of what you're dealing with. Dr. Palmer has resources. Let me tell you what I understand. Matthew leaned closer, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made hardened criminals confess during interrogations. I understand that Palmer's been kidnapping and murdering children for organ harvesting. I understand that you're either a co-conspirator or another victim he's controlling. And I understand that if anything happens to my daughter, I will personally ensure that everyone involved dies badly. Harmon stood up quickly, signaling her escorts. You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Hardy. No, Matthew replied. already backing toward his escape route. Palmer made the mistake when he marked my daughter. As Harmon's escorts converged on his position, Matthew melted into the wooded area of the park. His military training and police experience served him well. Within minutes, he'd reached his truck through a route his pursuers couldn't follow. But as he drove back toward the cabin, Matthew's phone rang. The caller ID showed Krista's number. "Matt." Her voice was tight with fear. "Someone's here. 2 cars, government plates. They say they're from Child Protective Services." Matthew floored the accelerator. "Don't let them in. Don't sign anything. I'm 20 minutes out. They have paperwork. They say there's been a report of neglect, that Emma's been exposed to dangerous individuals. Krista, listen to me carefully. Take Emma to Harvey's weapons cache. Lock yourselves in and don't come out until I get there. Matt, they're saying if we don't cooperate, they'll involve the FBI. That Emma could be placed in protective custody." Matthew realized Palmer's strategy. Can't get the family to cooperate? Use the system against them. Create a paper trail of neglect or endangerment. Remove the child through legal channels. Then make her disappear in the bureaucratic maze. Stall them. I'm almost there. As he crested the hill overlooking Harvey's cabin, Matthew saw 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway. Men in suits stood near the vehicles while others approached the front door. This wasn't CPS. This was a military-style extraction team. Matthew parked his truck behind a stand of trees and approached on foot, using the forest for cover. Through the cabin's windows, he could see Krista in the living room, facing 2 men in suits while Emma stood behind her mother, confusion and fear clear on the child's face. One of the men was speaking into a radio. Target acquired. Child matches description. Recommend immediate extraction. Matthew circled to the back of the cabin, entering through Harvey's concealed entrance to the basement armory. The weapons cache contained everything from hunting rifles to military-grade equipment Harvey had acquired through channels that didn't bear close scrutiny. Matthew selected a tactical shotgun and moved upstairs, positioning himself where he could see the living room through a partially open door. Time to see how serious Palmer's people were about their operation. Mrs. Hardy, one of the men, was saying, "We have documentation indicating Emma may have been exposed to illegal medical experimentation. For her safety, we need to take her for evaluation." "What documentation?" Krista demanded, her nurse's training making her question authority when it came to patient care. The man produced an official-looking folder. "Reports indicate your husband has been in contact with known criminals engaged in medical fraud. Emma needs to be examined by qualified professionals to ensure her safety." Emma stepped forward, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the tension. "Are you bad men?" The question clearly unsettled Palmer's operatives. The lead man knelt down to Emma's level, attempting a reassuring smile. "We're here to help you, Emma. We're doctors. Real doctors don't scare people," Emma said with startling clarity. "And real doctors don't come to houses without appointments." Matthew felt pride surge through his fear. His daughter was braver than adults twice her age. The man's patience evaporated. He stood up and nodded to his partner. "Ma'am, we're taking the child now. You can cooperate or face federal charges for obstruction." That's when Matthew stepped into the room, shotgun pointed at the floor but clearly visible. "Or you can leave my property before I call the real authorities." The room went silent. The 2 men assessed Matthew, noting his stance, his grip on the weapon, and the deadly calm in his expression. These weren't street criminals they could intimidate. This was a trained professional who'd clearly decided their lives were forfeit. "Mr. Hardy," the lead man said carefully, "we're federal agents. Threatening us is a felony. Show me your badges." The men exchanged glances. After a moment, the lead man reached for his jacket. Matthew's shotgun came up instantly, and the man froze. Slowly, the badge looked authentic, but Matthew had seen enough fake identification to spot irregularities. The serial numbers were wrong, and the photo looked recently added. "Nice try," Matthew said. "But federal agents don't conduct child removals without local law enforcement support. They also don't use unmarked vehicles or threaten families in their homes." He raised the shotgun to shoulder level. "You have 10 seconds to be in your vehicles and off my property." The men backed toward the door, speaking rapidly into their radios. Matthew heard fragments, package secured, negative, armed resistance, request backup. As the SUVs departed, Matthew knew this was just the opening move. Palmer's people would be back, and next time they'd come prepared for resistance. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to his daughter's level. "We're going to play a game for the next few days. It's called Staying Invisible. Can you do that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Are those men going to hurt us, Daddy?" Matthew looked into eyes that were far too wise for 8 years old. Someone had marked his daughter as a commodity before she could walk. They'd infiltrated his family, violated his home, and threatened the person he loved most in the world. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Not if I can help it." That night, after Emma was asleep, Matthew began planning Palmer's destruction in earnest. The federal prosecutor angle suggested Palmer had legitimate government connections, which meant playing by rules would only protect him. Matthew had spent his career bringing justice to people who thought they were above the law. Curtis Palmer was about to learn what justice looked like when the law couldn't reach you. Chapter 5. The Hunter and the Hunted. Dr. Rosario Chun arrived at Harvey's cabin just after dawn, her medical bag and laptop case suggesting she'd driven through the night from San Francisco. Matthew had reached out to her after confirming her credentials through Bruce Weber's investigation. Unlike the other members of Dr. Wall's group, Chun had impeccable documentation, a pediatric surgeon at UCSF with 20 years of spotless service. "I came as soon as I got your message," she said, embracing Krista warmly. "How's Emma holding up?" "She thinks we're camping," Krista replied. But she started to ask questions. Chun examined Emma's x-rays on her laptop, comparing them to images from other cases. The markers more sophisticated than most. Dunlap, or whoever he really is, has refined the technology significantly. "Can you remove it?" Matthew asked. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require specialized surgical equipment and a sterile environment. More importantly, removing it might trigger whatever tracking or monitoring systems are integrated with the marker." Matthew had suspected as much. "So we can't just cut it out and run." "Not without risking Emma's life. The marker appears to be integrated with several major nerve pathways. Remove it incorrectly, and she could lose motor function in her face and jaw." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "Dr. Chun, are you going to check my teeth too?" Chun smiled warmly. "Maybe later, sweetheart. Right now, I'm just visiting with your parents." As Emma went to get dressed, Chun's expression grew serious. "Matthew, I need to tell you something about my own situation. My daughter Sophia was taken 2 years ago. I've been hunting Palmer ever since." "Taken how?" "Approached at school by people claiming to be conducting a medical study. They had official paperwork, parent consent forms, the works. By the time I realized the forms were forged, Sophia was gone." Chin's voice remained steady, but Matthew could see the pain in her eyes. "Palmer offered me a deal afterward. Stop investigating, and Sophia would be returned unharmed. But you kept investigating. I'm a surgeon. I know what happens to children in Palmer's facilities." She pulled up files on her laptop. "I've been documenting his operations for 18 months. Medical supply purchases, personnel movements, financial transfers. He's running a sophisticated organ harvesting network with government protection." Matthew studied the data. "What's his end game? This seems like a lot of infrastructure for black market organs." "It's not black market. It's white market. Legal sales to wealthy clients who don't want to wait for traditional organ donor lists. Palmer maintains a registry of children with specific genetic markers. When a client needs a liver, heart, or kidney with precise compatibility requirements, Palmer delivers." The clinical nature of the explanation made it somehow worse. These weren't desperate criminals driven by poverty or addiction. These were wealthy, powerful people who viewed children as inventory to be harvested when convenient. Krista joined them, having overheard the conversation. "How many clients?" "I've identified at least 30. Politicians, entertainment executives, foreign nationals. People with enough money to buy perfect genetic matches instead of waiting their turn." Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Bruce Weber. "Seattle facility cleaned out professionally. No evidence left, but found something interesting in county records. Palmer purchased property near your location 48 hours ago. 200-acre compound, 15 miles northeast of your position. Matthew showed the message to Chun and Krista. He's not giving up. He's setting up locally to finish this. What do we do? Krista asked. Matthew was already moving toward Harvey's weapon cache. We stop running and start hunting. Chun looked alarmed. Matthew, Palmer has unlimited resources. You can't fight him directly. Watch me. Matthew began loading tactical gear into a duffel bag. Chun, I need you to stay here with Krista and Emma. If I'm not back by midnight, take them to Agent Jose Scott at the FBI field office. Tell him everything. Where are you going? To have a conversation with Curtis Palmer. Krista grabbed his arm. This is insane. You're one person against an entire organization. Matthew turned to face his wife, and she saw the same expression that had made violent criminals surrender rather than face him in dark alleys. Krista, someone put a tracking device in our daughter's jaw when she was an infant. They've been planning to murder her for 8 years. Palmer thinks he's hunting us, but he made one critical error. What's that? He threatened my family. Matthew shouldered the duffel bag. Curtis Palmer has never dealt with someone like me. As Matthew disappeared into the forest, moving toward Palmer's newly established compound, Krista found herself praying for the first time in years. But she wasn't praying for her husband's safety. She was praying for Palmer's soul, because she'd seen what Matthew Hardy did to people who hurt children. And Palmer had hurt a lot of children. Chapter 6. Into the Lion's Den. The compound Palmer had purchased sat in a valley surrounded by dense forest, accessible by a single road that wound through terrain perfect for an ambush. Matthew spent 4 hours conducting reconnaissance, mapping guard positions, camera placements, and patrol patterns through his scope. Palmer's security was professional but predictable. 12-man teams, rotating shifts, standard corporate security protocols. They were prepared for investigators, whistleblowers, maybe even federal raids. They weren't prepared for a hunter. Matthew's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Hardy, I know you're watching. Let's talk. Alone. Main building, 3rd floor. 1 hour. CP. Either Palmer was very confident or very stupid. Matthew suspected both. He circled the compound, identifying weak points in the perimeter. The facility's legitimate medical research cover meant they couldn't appear too fortress-like. Security cameras had blind spots, fence lines had gaps near drainage areas, and the forest provided concealment right to the building's edge. At exactly 8 p.m., Matthew cut through the fence behind the main building and made his way to the service entrance. The door was unlocked, Palmer's invitation. The elevator to the 3rd floor was waiting, also unlocked. The man waiting in the executive office looked nothing like Matthew had imagined. Curtis Palmer was in his 60s, well-dressed, but not ostentatious, with the bearing of a university professor rather than a criminal mastermind. He sat behind a mahogany desk, hands folded calmly, as if receiving expected guests. Detective Hardy, please sit. Palmer's voice carried a slight accent Matthew couldn't place. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but your refusal to cooperate has forced some urgency. Matthew remained standing, noting exit routes and potential weapons. Where's Emma's real birth mother? Direct. I appreciate that. Palmer opened a file folder. Emma's biological mother was Maria Santos, age 19, undocumented immigrant from El Salvador. She participated in our genetic research program in exchange for medical care during pregnancy. Participated or was coerced. The distinction is irrelevant now. Ms. Santos fulfilled her obligations and was compensated appropriately. She's dead. Medical complications during childbirth. Regrettable, but not uncommon in high-risk pregnancies. Palmer's tone suggested he was discussing weather patterns rather than human lives. Matthew felt his anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. How many children are in your program? Currently, 47 active subjects across 12 states. Emma represents our most genetically valuable acquisition to date. Acquisition. Palmer smiled thinly. Please don't pretend moral outrage, detective. You spent 20 years investigating homicides in Portland. You know what humans do to each other for money, drugs, territory. I simply apply market principles to medical need. My clients require specific genetic matches for survival. I provide them by murdering children, by conducting advanced medical research with voluntary subjects. Palmer opened another file. Your daughter's marker indicates tissue compatibility with a client who requires a liver transplant within 6 months. Emma's genetic profile suggests her liver would be a perfect match. Matthew's hand moved toward his weapon, but Palmer raised a finger. Before you do something irreversible, consider this. I currently employ Veronica Harmon as a legal consultant. Her daughter Sophia is safely housed at our Seattle research facility, receiving excellent medical care. Ms. Harmon's cooperation ensures Sophia's continued well-being. You're blackmailing a federal prosecutor. I'm providing employment to a mother whose child requires specialized medical attention. Sophia's marker was removed surgically, but the procedure caused some nerve damage. She needs ongoing treatment that costs approximately $50,000 monthly. Matthew began to understand Palmer's operation more clearly. It wasn't just about organ harvesting. It was about creating a network of compromised professionals who couldn't expose him without destroying themselves. Dr. Walls, his grandson has a marker. Young Timothy, age 6. Dr. Walls provides identification services in exchange for Timothy's safety. Palmer leaned back in his chair. You see, Detective, everyone in our network has excellent reasons for cooperation. Except me. Except you. Which brings us to our current situation. Palmer pressed a button on his desk, and monitors around the room displayed live video feeds. Harvey's cabin from multiple angles, showing Krista and Emma inside. Your wife and daughter are currently surrounded by my security team. Dr. Chun is also with them, I see. Matthew's blood went cold, but his expression didn't change. If you hurt them, I won't need to. You're going to cooperate because you're intelligent enough to recognize reality. Emma's marker makes her extremely valuable to my organization. You can profit from that value, or you can be eliminated as an obstacle to accessing it. Matthew studied the monitors, counting personnel, and noting positions. 12 men surrounded the cabin, armed and positioned for a tactical assault. Even if Harvey's security systems held them off temporarily, it would only delay the inevitable. What exactly are you offering? Palmer smiled, sensing victory. $5 million. Immediate relocation to any country of your choice. New identities for your family. Emma receives the best medical care available while contributing to research that will save lives. And after your client gets Emma's liver, Emma will be remembered as a hero whose sacrifice advanced medical science. Palmer's casual tone made the statement even more chilling. Many families would consider that a meaningful legacy. Matthew appeared to consider the offer, studying the monitors and noting details Palmer probably didn't realize he was absorbing. Guard positions, communication equipment, the layout of Palmer's compound. I have conditions, Matthew said finally. I'm listening. First, I want to see Emma's medical file. All of it. I want to know exactly what you did to her and when. Palmer nodded. Reasonable. Second, I want proof that families who've cooperated were actually relocated and not eliminated. Also reasonable. Third, I want to meet your client. The person who's buying my daughter's liver. Palmer hesitated. That's unusual, but perhaps it could be arranged. Matthew smiled for the first time since entering the office. Good, because I'm going to need to look him in the eye when I kill him. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Palmer's confident expression faltered as he reassessed the man sitting across from him. Detective Hardy, I think you misunderstand. Matthew stood up slowly. No, Mr. Palmer, you misunderstand. You think I'm here to negotiate. I'm not. I'm here to declare war. Palmer pressed another button on his desk, probably summoning security. You're surrounded, Detective. Your family is surrounded. You have no leverage. I have something better than leverage, Matthew replied, moving toward the window. I have nothing left to lose. Before Palmer could respond, Matthew smashed through the third-floor window in a shower of glass and steel, disappearing into the night forest below. Palmer stared at the shattered window in disbelief. Security teams were already mobilizing, But Matthew Hardy had vanished into terrain he knew intimately, carrying enough weapons and training to make Palmer's life very complicated. The hunter had just become the hunted. Chapter 7. The Setup. Matthew moved through the forest like a ghost, using skills learned in Afghanistan and refined during 2 decades of police work. Palmer's security teams were competent but loud, their radio communications giving away positions and search patterns. Within an hour, Matthew had circled back to a position overlooking Hardy's cabin. The tactical situation was worse than he'd hoped. Palmer's people had established a perimeter with overlapping fields of fire, making direct assault suicide. But Matthew wasn't planning a direct assault. He was planning something much more personal. His encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chun, family secure in basement. Harvey's panic room will hold indefinitely. Security team getting frustrated. What's your play? Matthew smiled grimly as he typed back. Palmer wants to play games with children. Time to show him what happens when you threaten the wrong family. Over the next 3 hours, Matthew systematically dismantled Palmer's operation piece by piece. He started with communications, using techniques learned during counterterrorism operations to jam radio frequencies and disrupt cell coverage. Palmer's teams found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate effectively. Next came psychological warfare. Matthew began picking off perimeter guards one by one, not killing them, but leaving them zip-tied in positions where their teammates would find them. Each discovery ratcheted up the fear factor, making Palmer's people jumpy and prone to mistakes. By midnight, Palmer's 12-man team had been reduced to 6, and those 6 were clustered around the cabin in a defensive position that made them sitting ducks for anyone with high ground impatience. Matthew's phone rang, Palmer calling directly. Impressive work, detective. You're better than I anticipated. I'm just getting started. I can see that. Perhaps we should reconsider our arrangement. Matthew had positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the compound, his rifle scope trained on Palmer's office window. Here's my new arrangement. Release my family. Leave the country. Never come back. I'm afraid that's not possible. Too much has been invested in this operation to simply abandon it. Then you die tonight. Palmer's silence stretched for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less confident, more calculating. You know, detective, there's something I should mention about Emma's adoption. I'm listening. You weren't randomly selected as adoptive parents. We specifically chose you because of your background. Military service, law enforcement experience, strong moral code. We needed Emma placed with someone who would protect her if the situation became complicated. Matthew's scope remained steady on Palmer's silhouette. Meaning you were always meant to be the last line of defense. Emma's marker doesn't just contain genetic information. It contains encrypted evidence of our entire operation. Client lists, financial records, documentation of every child we've processed. The revelation hit Matthew like a physical blow. You turn my daughter into a walking hard drive. Insurance policy. If our operation was ever compromised, Emma's marker would ensure mutual destruction. Expose us, and you expose evidence that would implicate dozens of powerful people who would kill to keep their secrets safe. Matthew felt the trap closing around him. Palmer hadn't just stolen his daughter. He'd made her into a living dead man's switch. Remove the marker, and Emma dies. Expose Palmer's operation, and Emma becomes a target for every powerful person on his client list. You're wondering if there's a way out, Palmer continued. There isn't. Emma's value lies not just in her organs, but in her silence. As long as she exists, she represents a threat to very dangerous people. Unless she disappears into our program. New identity, isolated facility, complete medical care for life. She lives, but Curtis Palmer's secrets die with her original identity. Matthew lowered his rifle. Palmer was offering a devil's bargain. Emma's life in exchange for her freedom. Keep her safe by making her a prisoner, or try to free her and make her a target for every criminal Palmer had ever served. But Matthew Hardy hadn't become a successful detective by accepting impossible situations. Every case had a solution if you were willing to think beyond conventional approaches. I'll need time to consider your offer, Matthew said. 24 hours. After that, the situation becomes fluid. As Palmer ended the call, Matthew was already formulating a new plan. Palmer thought he held all the cards, but he'd made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed Matthew would prioritize Emma's safety over justice. Palmer had never dealt with someone who viewed justice and safety as the same thing. Matthew's next call was to Earl Rich, the private investigator whose grandson had been marked. "Earl, it's Matthew Hardy. I need to know everything you've learned about Palmer's client list." "Jesus, Matt, where are you? Word is Palmer's got half the Pacific Northwest looking for you." "Good. Let them look. What do you know about his clients?" Earl's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've identified 12 major buyers. Politicians, entertainment executives, a Supreme Court justice's wife. These people have enough power to make entire investigations disappear. Any of them local?" "Actually, yes. Philip Dunlap, the fake identity Palmer uses for medical operations, has been treating a client in Portland for 6 months. Regular visits, specialized care. I think Palmer's been preparing for a major procedure." Matthew felt pieces clicking into place. "What kind of procedure?" "Liver transplant. Client is a man named Nicholas Birch, age 54. Owns 3 casinos in Nevada and has connections to organized crime. He's been on the donor list for 2 years, but his legal troubles make him ineligible for legitimate transplants. So Palmer promised him a perfect genetic match." "Exactly. And according to medical records I acquired, Birch's condition is deteriorating rapidly. He needs the transplant within weeks or he dies." Matthew smiled for the first time in days. Palmer's operation depended on maintaining secrecy and avoiding attention. But what if the operation became very public very quickly? "Earl, how would you like to help me destroy Curtis Palmer? I've been waiting 2 years for that opportunity." "Good, because I'm about to turn Palmer's own system against him." As Matthew outlined his plan, Earl's laughter carried across the encrypted connection. "Matt, that's either brilliant or completely insane. Sometimes there's no difference." Matthew ended the call and began moving toward Palmer's compound. The real game was about to begin, and this time, Matthew Hardy was making the rules. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Nicholas Birch's casino penthouse in Portland was everything Matthew had expected: gaudy, excessive, and secured by men who thought intimidation was the same as competence. Matthew had been watching the building for 6 hours, timing guard rotations and identifying vulnerabilities. Earl Rich's intelligence had been accurate. Birch was indeed Palmer's client, scheduled for liver transplant surgery in 3 days at a private medical facility Palmer had established in an abandoned hospital outside the city. The surgery would use Emma's liver, assuming Palmer could complete her acquisition. But Matthew wasn't planning to prevent the surgery. He was planning to ensure it happened exactly as scheduled, with one crucial modification. At 3 a.m., Matthew entered Birch's penthouse through a service elevator maintenance shaft, bypassing electronic security through methods learned during covert operations. Birch's bodyguard were positioned to stop threats coming through normal channels: doors, windows, stairwells. They weren't watching for someone who approached through the building's infrastructure. Birch himself was awake, sitting in his study reviewing what appeared to be medical reports. The man was visibly ill, jaundiced skin, labored breathing, the telltale signs of liver failure. Palmer had chosen his client well. Birch was desperate enough to agree to anything. "Mr. Birch," Matthew said quietly, stepping from the shadows. Birch spun around, reaching for a panic button, but stopped when he saw Matthew's calm demeanor and raised hands. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Matthew Hardy. I believe you're planning to purchase my daughter's liver." Birch's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Matthew sat down uninvited, studying Birch with the same intensity he'd once used on murder suspects. "Let me tell you what I know. You're Nicholas Birch, age 54, worth approximately $40 million from casino operations. You've been on the liver transplant list for 18 months, but were removed due to lifestyle factors, meaning your criminal connections." Birch said nothing, but his breathing became more labored. "Dr. Palmer approached you 6 months ago with a private solution. Perfect genetic match, guaranteed compatibility, surgery performed at a facility outside normal oversight. Cost: $3 million, plus ongoing considerations. You're insane. Matthew pulled out his phone, showing Birch photographs of Emma. This is the 8-year-old child whose liver you've purchased. Her name is Emma Hardy. She likes to read, she's learning to play piano, and she builds elaborate fairy houses in our backyard. Birch looked at the photographs, and Matthew saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Regret? It was quickly replaced by defensive anger. I didn't ask for any of this. Birch said. Palmer approached me. He said the children were already dying, that the organs would be wasted otherwise. What children? Terminal cases. Kids with brain cancer, genetic disorders. Palmer said the organs were being harvested from children who were going to die anyway. Matthew felt a moment of surprise. Palmer had told Birch a completely different story than the organ farming operation Shen had described. Either Palmer compartmentalized his lies, or there were multiple operations running simultaneously. Mr. Birch, let me be very clear about something. Emma is perfectly healthy. So are the other 46 children Palmer has processed. He's not harvesting organs from terminal patients. He's murdering healthy kids for profit. Birch stared at the photographs for a long moment. Jesus Christ. What have I done? That depends on what you do next. Matthew leaned forward. You have two choices. Continue with Palmer's surgery and spend whatever time you have left knowing you murdered child. Or help me stop him. Help you how? Palmer's got connections everywhere. Police, federal agencies, hospital boards. He's untouchable. Everyone's touchable if you know where to press. Matthew pulled out a recording device. I need you to make a phone call to Palmer. Tell him you've had second thoughts about the surgery. He'll never believe that. I'm dying. You're not canceling the surgery. You're requesting a meeting with the organ donor first. Tell him you want to ensure the child understands the importance of her sacrifice. Birch looked horrified. Why would I want to meet her? Because Palmer's entire operation depends on maintaining the illusion that this is legitimate medical research. If a client starts asking uncomfortable questions, showing unusual interest in the donors, it threatens the psychological distance that allows his people to function. Matthew could see Birch processing this. You're trying to spook his organization. I'm trying to force Palmer into making mistakes. Stressed people make bad decisions. Bad decisions create opportunities. Birch made the call, following Matthew's script precisely. Palmer's voice came through clearly on the speakerphone, initially resistant but gradually agreeing to arrange a meeting between client and donor. Excellent, Palmer said finally. We'll arrange something appropriate. Perhaps a brief interaction where Emma can understand the importance of her contribution to medical science. After ending the call, Birch looked nauseated. He talks about her like she's livestock. Now you're beginning to understand. Matthew stood to leave. The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. You're going to wear a wire and record everything Palmer says about his operation. What if he discovers the recording? Matthew's smile was cold as winter. Then you'll die knowing you helped save 47 other children from the same fate. As Matthew prepared to leave, Birch called after him. Detective, if we do this, if we expose Palmer, what happens to Sophia Harmon? To Dr. Wall's grandson? To all the other children he's holding? Matthew paused at the window. We save them all, Mr. Birch. Every single one. How can you be sure? Because, Matthew said, disappearing back into the maintenance shaft, Curtis Palmer has never faced someone who fights for children the way I do. The next phase of Matthew's plan required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Palmer thought he was orchestrating a meeting between predator and prey. Instead, he was walking into a trap that would destroy his entire operation. And Matthew Hardy would be there to spring it. Chapter 9. Justice Served. The abandoned St. Mary's Hospital sat on 15 acres of overgrown landscape, its Gothic architecture perfect for Palmer's purposes. The building had been closed for 5 years due to budget cuts, but Palmer had purchased it through shell companies and converted the surgical suites into a private medical facility. Matthew positioned himself in the hospital's bell tower 90 minutes before the scheduled meeting, his rifle trained on the main entrance while monitoring radio frequencies Palmer's team used. Earl Rich was stationed in a van outside the perimeter, recording everything and ready to transmit evidence to media outlets and federal authorities if the operation went wrong. At exactly 2 p.m., 3 vehicles arrived. Palmer emerged from the first, followed by Veronica Harmon and 2 security guards. The second vehicle contained Nicholas Birch, looking pale but determined. The third vehicle made Matthew's blood boil. Emma sat between 2 adults, her small face pressed against the window as she stared at the imposing hospital building. Matthew activated his recording equipment as the group moved inside. Birch wore a wire provided by Earl Rich, sophisticated enough to transmit clearly while remaining undetectable to standard security sweeps. Through his scope, Matthew watched the group enter the hospital's main surgical suite. Palmer had prepared the space carefully. Medical equipment that looked legitimate but was actually designed for organ harvesting. Monitoring systems that would record Emma's vital signs during the procedure and restraints disguised as safety equipment. Palmer's voice came through clearly on Birch's wire. "Mr. Birch, I'd like you to meet Emma. Emma, this is the gentleman whose life you're going to save." Emma's 8-year-old voice carried across the transmission with heartbreaking clarity. "Are you sick, Mr. Birch?" "Yes, sweetheart. Very sick. My daddy says sick people need help. Are the doctors going to help you?" Matthew heard Birch's sharp intake of breath through the wire. Palmer stepped in smoothly. "That's right, Emma. You're going to help Mr. Birch get better. It's a very special kind of help. Will it hurt?" "You won't feel anything at all," Palmer replied with clinical precision. "The procedure will be conducted under general anesthesia. You'll simply go to sleep, and when you wake up, Mr. Birch will be much healthier." Emma's innocent voice cut through Palmer's lies. "But if you take my liver, won't I get sick too?" The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Palmer spoke. "Emma, sometimes helping others requires sacrifice. Your sacrifice will save Mr. Birch's life and advance medical research that could help thousands of other children." "But I don't want to die." Matthew had to grip his rifle stock to keep his hands steady. Through his scope, he could see Emma standing in the surgical suite, dwarfed by adults who viewed her as nothing more than a source of spare parts. Birch's voice cracked as he spoke. "Palmer, she understands what you're planning to do. Children adapt quickly to medical procedures. Emma will be sedated shortly, and she knows you're going to kill her." Birch's voice grew stronger. "Jesus Christ, Palmer, she's just a baby." Matthew heard movement through the wire. Probably Palmer signaling his security team. "Mr. Birch, I think you're experiencing pre-surgical anxiety. Perhaps we should postpone." "No." Birch's voice carried new resolve. "Emma, sweetheart, come here." Through his scope, Matthew watched Birch kneel down to Emma's level, his back to Palmer and the security guards. What happened next made Matthew realize he'd underestimated the dying man's courage. "Emma," Birch said quietly, "when I count to 3, I want you to run as fast as you can toward that red exit sign. Can you do that for me?" "Mr. Birch, please don't interfere with the procedure," Palmer said sharply. "1," Birch said, standing up and moving between Emma and Palmer's team. "Security, restrain Mr. Birch immediately," Palmer ordered. 2. The security guards moved forward, but Birch was already in motion. Despite his illness, he threw himself at the nearest guard, disrupting their formation and creating chaos in the confined space. 3. Birch shouted. Emma ran. Palmer's voice cut through the commotion. "Stop her. If she reaches the exit, we lose everything." Matthew was already moving, rappelling down the bell tower's exterior and crashing through a second-floor window as Emma reached the hospital's main corridor. He landed hard but rolled, coming up with his weapon drawn as Palmer's remaining security team spread out to search for the fleeing child. "Emma," Matthew called. "This way." His daughter's voice echoed from somewhere in the hospital's maze of corridors. "Daddy." Palmer's people were closing in, and Matthew could hear Palmer himself coordinating the search over radio. "She can't leave this building. Too much depends on maintaining operational security." Matthew moved through the hospital systematically, using his knowledge of the building's layout gained from studying architectural plans. He found Emma hiding in a supply closet on the first floor, tears streaming down her face, but trying to be brave. "Daddy, the bad men want to hurt me." "I know, sweetheart, but they're not going to get the chance." Matthew lifted Emma, noting that she was lighter than she should be for her age. Palmer's marker had affected her development in subtle ways that were only now becoming apparent. They reached the main exit just as Palmer's team converged on their position. 3 armed men blocked the doorway, weapons drawn but not aimed. They needed Emma alive and undamaged. Detective Hardy, Palmer's voice came from behind them. You're only delaying the inevitable. I have resources you can't imagine, connections you can't fight. Surrender now, and I'll ensure Emma's procedure is as comfortable as possible. Matthew turned to face Palmer, noting the man's position relative to his security team. In his arms, Emma pressed her face against his shoulder, trying to hide from the nightmare surrounding her. You're right about one thing, Palmer. You do have resources I can't imagine. Matthew smiled. But you made one critical error. What's that? You assumed I was fighting alone. The hospital's lights cut out simultaneously, plunging the building into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, but the disruption was enough. Earl Rich and his team entered through multiple access points, armed and moving with military precision. In the confusion, Matthew noticed movement from an unexpected direction. Nicholas Birch appeared behind Palmer, having somehow overpowered his guards. The dying man held a scalpel he'd taken from the surgical suite. Dr. Curtis Palmer, Birch said, his voice carrying across the chaos. You're under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Palmer spun around, reaching for a weapon, but Birch was faster. The scalpel found Palmer's throat with surgical precision, guided by a man who'd spent months studying medical procedures in preparation for his own surgery. Palmer collapsed, his life ending in the same sterile, clinical manner he'd planned for 47 children. The aftermath moved quickly. Earl Rich's team secured Palmer's remaining personnel, while Matthew called Agent Jose Scott directly. The FBI arrived within an hour, followed by media outlets that Earl had prepositioned based on Matthew's instructions. By dawn, Palmer's operation was front-page news across the country. The encrypted data from Emma's marker, extracted safely by Dr. Chun using equipment from Palmer's own facility, provided evidence that destroyed Palmer's entire network. Clients were arrested, facilities raided, and children reunited with families who'd thought they were dead. Veronica Harmon was found in Palmer's facility, having been held prisoner rather than employed as claimed. Her daughter Sophia was alive, damaged but healing, and mother and daughter were reunited after 3 years of separation. Dr. Walls and his grandson were placed in protective custody until the full scope of Palmer's network could be mapped and destroyed. The system Palmer had used to control his accomplices became the key to liberating them. 3 months later, Matthew sat in his backyard watching Emma build fairy houses while Krista tended her garden. Emma's marker had been successfully removed by Dr. Chun, with no lasting effects beyond a small scar that would fade with time. Emma looked up from her construction project. Daddy, do you think the bad man is sorry for what he did? Matthew considered the question seriously. Palmer had died, believing he was conducting legitimate medical research, that his clients deserved life more than the children who provided it. Sociopaths rarely experienced genuine remorse. I think he was very sick, sweetheart. Sick in a way that made him unable to understand right from wrong. Like when I had a fever and said mean things to Mom. Something like that. But some kinds of sickness can't be cured. Emma nodded solemnly and returned to her fairy house. Matthew watched her work, marveling at the resilience of children. Emma remembered the scary men and the big hospital, but to her, it was just another adventure that had ended safely. Krista joined him on the deck, coffee in hand. Dr. Chin called. They found the last of Palmer's facilities in Mexico. 18 children recovered, all alive. That makes 65 total. The FBI thinks there might be more. Palmer's records go back 20 years. Matthew nodded, already knowing he'd spend the rest of his life ensuring every child Palmer had touched was found and returned home safely. Some fights didn't end with a single victory. They required a lifetime of vigilance. Nicholas Birch had survived his liver transplant, receiving an organ from a legitimate donor who died in an accident. He'd used his connections to help the FBI track down Palmer's clients, seeking redemption for his near participation in Emma's murder. The man who'd been willing to kill a child for his own survival had become one of the operation's most valuable witnesses. Any regrets? Krista asked, settling beside her husband. Matthew watched Emma carry her completed fairy house to the garden, chattering to herself about the imaginary creatures who would live there. His daughter was safe, dozens of other children had been rescued, and a network of predators had been destroyed. Curtis Palmer's empire had fallen because he'd made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that threatening a child would make her father desperate and controllable. Instead, he'd awakened something in Matthew Hardy that Palmer had never encountered before, a parent's love backed by a soldier's training and a detective's intelligence. No regrets, Matthew said, pulling Krista closer. Some people need to be stopped, and sometimes stopping them isn't pretty. But Emma's building fairy houses instead of being harvested for organs. I can live with that trade. As the sun set over Portland, Emma called from the garden, "Mom, Dad, come see. The fairies are going to love their new house." Matthew and Krista walked hand in hand toward their daughter's voice, leaving behind the darkness that had briefly touched their lives. In the distance, the city lights began to twinkle, each one representing families who would sleep safely tonight because Curtis Palmer's nightmare was finally over. Emma Hardy would grow up knowing her parents had fought monsters to keep her safe, and Matthew Hardy would sleep knowing that some monsters, once faced, never get back up. The fairy house stood completed in the garden, small and perfect and protected, just like the family that had built it together. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.